збираються разом, щоб знайти рішення.
Долучайся до обговорення. Програма форуму на сайті sweek.org.ua.
Проект реалізовується у партнерстві із фондом Конрада Аденауера в Україні. Вагомість екологічної кризи вимагає, аби всі працювали для спільного добра і поступу, зазначив Папа Франциск в енцикліці «Лаудато Сі».
З 7 по 10 жовтня відбудеться 13-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень «Почути крик землі. Інтегральна екологія в дії».
Провідні богослови, кардинал Пітер Турксон, префект дискатерії служіння цілісному людському розвиткові, отець доктор Джон Хріссавгіс, радник Вселенського патріарха з екологічних питань, доктор Юрген Мольтман, протестантський богослов, дискутуватимуть про роль церков у вирішенні екологічних питань.
Долучайся до обговорення. Програма форуму на сайті esweek.org.ua.
Проект реалізовується у партнерстві із фондом Конрада Аденауера в Україні. Як сформувати нову екологічну свідомість? Як плекати екологічні знання та навики? Яка роль освіти? Запрошуємо освітян приєднатися до учасників Всеукраїнського суспільного форуму.
З 7 по 10 жовтня відбудеться 13-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень «Почути крик землі. Інтегральна екологія в дії».
Науковці вітчизняних та зарубіжних університетів, експерти з екобогослов'я та сталого розвитку, наукові здобутки та навчальні практики. Дізнайтеся, як наука та освіта відповідають на екологічні.
You can select a button on the panel and select English or Ukrainian. That means you are going to listen to either of Ukrainian or English translation.
Choose language, English or Russian. Thank you.
We are starting from the prayer, Glory to our Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. Our Heavenly Father, the Holy Spirit, who is everywhere and fills out everything, please come unto us and cleanse us of any sin and save our souls. Welcome to everyone, to all the participants of this conference here on site in this hall and everyone who participates with us online. May God bless you. Let's take care of the earth. They say that if we take care of the earth will be able to feed people twice or thrice more than it does today. Thank you. I'm glad to welcome all the participants. And I'm grateful to Metropolitan and Archbishop Ihor, who gave a start to our Ecumenical Week with a prayer. My name is Pavlo Smitsnyuk. I am director of the Ecumenic Studies Institute at the Ukrainian Catholic University, and I will be the moderator of this session. Technical moderator is Roman Figas, and you will receive all the information pertaining to technical issues during this forum. Again, I emphasize that in order to receive translation into Ukrainian, you have to select button interpretation and then choose Russian. English translation, I am speaking. Can you hear English translation? I'm on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the channel for English translation. Can you hear? Can you hear the English translation? Please, if you do, comment this in the chat. Please write down, yes, we can hear English translation in the channel. Now, can you hear English translation of the floor? English translation of the floor speaker? While we are still waiting for English connection, I will briefly say in Ukrainian how the session will start and go on. We will start from brief greetings that will last to maximum 2 minutes. I will ask to speak as slow as possible so that our translator could have time to interpret this into English or into Ukrainian. The speakers will have 20 minutes at their disposal at most to perform their speech. I will kindly ask also to slow down and not to go over the time limit. I will kindly ask you, participants, please react whether you hear the English translation.
Sorry. Sorry, Pavel. We have a problem.
I will kindly ask our technical assistants to tell us whether the problem has been solved.
We have a problem. We are connecting Cardinal Texan, and he's already connected, but I cannot see him here because the link sent to him disactivates his audio and video. There is no way to connect audio and video for him.
I will kindly ask our technical service to make Cardinal Turkson as one of the panelists so that we could see. Can you hear? Can you hear translation into English? Please, both the panelists and the participants, let us know somehow whether you can hear the English translation. I got the positive answer, but I think that's because the sound went in real sound into the room, through the speakers in the room, isn't it? They say that they heard very briefly this translation when it sounded through the speakers in the room. Can they now hear the translation? Please let us know if now you can hear the English translation. Can you hear English translation at the moment? I'm very sorry for this pause but it's significant. Please react if you can hear English translation. I can see there is confirmation that the English translation is hearable. Thus, we can continue our conference. I will not dwell for a long on the introduction. I will say only the following. First of all, on behalf of the Institute of Ecumenic Studies, let me greet all the participants and all the panelists, all the speakers, the representatives of Konrad Adenauer Fund, the government, the local government of the city of Lviv, all the structures that joined us in organizing this event. Pope Francis asked to dedicate this year to reflections about Laudato Si', and our forum is one of the ways to reply to his call. Today we want to hear the cry of the earth. It's the title of our today's conference. But we also want to hear each other. The church wants to hear secular experts. Journalists want to hear businessmen. Activists want to hear representatives of the local and national powers. So the great task of this forum is to hear and to be heard, and to listen to each other. I have explained the time limitations. Since the problem with the issue with translation has been sorted out, I will ask now the first person to have a greeting word, and I'm inviting Reverend Bohdan Prach, rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University, to say a brief welcoming speech. Glory be to Jesus Christ. Every year in our rooms, we've been greeting each other with a smile, with a meeting, and we touched each other and we embraced each other. And it happened so that the 13th Ecumenic Week is happening under these circumstances when we are far away from each other, although we are quite close in the spirit, because we understand that we have to hear each other, to hear the cry of the earth, and as Mr. Smitsnyuk said, to hear each other. We as a university are welcoming most heartily this wonderful event, the organizers, and also we are greeting all those who want to join us, who have already joined us, and all the initiatives that have been born in our hearts and then bloom in our organizations. Let them all unite us for the benefit of the earth and for the sake of each of us and for all the coming generations. I wish the good consequences, results, and fruits of this event. I wish all the successes to everyone, and glory be to Jesus Christ. Thank you, Father Rector, for this support and for this welcoming word, and thank you for supporting us on behalf of the university. And now I want to pass the floor to Tim Patterson, who is director of the representative office of Konrad Adenauer Foundation, who is the partner of organizing this event. You're welcome. We cannot hear you. Can you make your mic on? Can you make this? Mr. Patters is online. We can see you. Hopefully, we will also hear you.
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Do you hear me?
We do hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, dear guests, greetings from Kiev. On behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation Ukraine, I would like to welcome you to our online event. The balance between economical welfare and the protection of our environment are key questions of the future of our planet. ecological questions became more and more urgent for all of us. And I'm very pleased that such important discussions are taking place also in Ukraine. I would like to thank all our partners, mainly the Ukrainian Catholic University and the Institute for the Excellent Cooperation. I wish all of us now an interesting event, and thank you very much. Yakuyu.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your greeting, welcoming word. Is Dr. Ivan Detsko with us? Reverend Ivan Detsko is the president of the Ecumenical Studies Institute, and he's also supposed to welcome us with a brief statement. Glory to Jesus Christ. Dear participants of the 13th Ecumenical Social Week, may, first of all, our God be praised, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Institute for Ecumenical Studies at the Ukrainian Catholic University. I want to thank this institute for organizing this week, which is dedicated to the problems of ecology in Ukraine and all over the world. We express gratitude for brilliant work done by my friends and colleagues in the Institute. May our God pay you hundredfold. We all know the address of our Pope, our world church leader, but also you know the statements of our Metropolitan Sviatoslav. And also I want to mention the Metropolitan Boris, who is the president of the Ukrainian Catholic University. They have all given us a chance to understand what a significant problem is the environmental issue, to hear the cry of the earth. Clean the world, the earth that God has given to you. It is the Institute of Ecumenical Studies at UKU that has done a lot on the way to implementing this task. UKU together with other UCU together with other church institutions take effort to cleanse our earth from all the bad things. So I'm calling you to also take effort in this. I welcome you all to this event and I wish you fruitful work, and may you all be blessed by God. Reverend Father, thank you. Reverend Ivan, thank you very much for your word. Now I am inviting the mayor of Lviv, Mr. Andriy Sadovy. Lviv has been always supporting many of our previous ecumenical weeks, and we are grateful that this time we also managed to organize this meeting, this event together with the city mayor. Glory to Jesus Christ, to all the guests and participants of the event from Lviv. I'm also grateful to all the contemporary means of communication that make it possible for so many people to join us remotely. And the topic that you have selected is mega important, is of huge significance. It's like our nature, our earth is like a crystal that we have to preserve. Pope Francis said a lot about this. We also have here messages from patriarchs of Orthodox church. I want briefly to say what we are doing here in Lviv in this respect. You probably know that we had a couple of years ago a problem with waste and dump site in Lviv. So we've been working hard to make sure that leaves and all their organic waste is not burnt anymore. We've been doing this as the first city in Ukraine. We also have made a treaty with the enterprise Electron. And now Electron, on top of our special ecological request, is also making 10 new trams that are environmental friendly. Throughout the next 4 years, out of 4 big parks, we want to have 40 parks in the city, because we have to make this world better, cleaner, and greener. I wish all the best to the participants of the forum, and I am looking forward to the times when you will be able to come over here to Lviv, and you will be able to be treated to our coffee and chocolate. So my greetings to all of you. Glory be to Jesus Christ. Dear Mayor, glory be forever. Thank you for your welcoming word. Indeed, when we started organizing this conference, Cardinal Turkson and Professor Moltmann and Dr. Archbishop John Chrysavgis agreed to come over to Lviv. Unfortunately, now this all has to happen online, but I hope we will be able to gather physically as soon as better times arrive. Now I want to pass the floor to one of our key speakers, Cardinal Peter Turkson, Prefect Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development. We are happy that His Excellence agreed to give a speech before our participants. It's your turn. We cannot hear you.
Is it okay? Okay. So, dear President, Reverend
Дорогий президенте,
Smitsniuk,
не чути.
and all of you, dear participants, distinguished participants, I want to
Дорогі Не чую, на жаль. I'm not hearing you. That's why I cannot render what you're saying, unfortunately.
You can hear me now. So can I?
Я не повинна тут чути, мені потрібен навушники звук. Чуєш, подивися. А куди я буду перекладати? Окей. Туди перекладаєш, де ти перекладаєш. Cardinal Peter Turkson, please, can you speak?
So the translator will have the text before him. Okay. So looking back, I would like hereby to review Catholic social teaching and how it addresses the question. how it addresses the question of environment in the fullest sense. For as we know, okay, so the church is always meditating upon the gift of faith and applying it to the changing circumstances of the world and history. So I will draw this material from the pontificates of Pope Paul VI, Pope John Paul II, and Pope Emeritus Benedict. Both of these holy fathers have contributed significantly to a deepened understanding of the relationship between natural and human ecology. So our account of Catholic social teaching begins with the encyclical Rerum Novarum of Pope Leo XIII, which was issued in 1891. While that encyclical focused on the conditions and the rights of workers, it also contained some seeds of current ideas about natural environment. For example, it stated that those who receive God's bounty in the form of natural resources or property should exercise their responsibility as the steward of God's providence for the benefit of others. And so, coming to Pope Paul VI, his encyclical letter Populorum Progressio in 1967 treated many facets of development of people. Two of the key ideas are development is the new name of peace, and an effective world authority to cope with the changing environmental and financial situations. So in connection with the environment, the Pope says, by dint of intelligent thought and hard work, the human person gradually uncovers the hidden laws of nature and learns to make better use of natural resources. As he takes control over his way of life, he is stimulated to undertake new investigations and fresh discoveries, to take prudent risks and launch new ventures, and to act responsibly, to give himself unselfishly. In his apostolic letter Octogesimo Adveniens in 1971, Pope Paul VI further addressed the inseparable relationship and interdependence between human life and natural environment. Saying that man is certainly becoming aware a victim of his degradation. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Pope Paul VI said, man is suddenly becoming aware that by ill-considered exploitation of nature, this degradation. and so creating an environment for tomorrow which will become intolerable. Pope Paul VI also expressed concern about the control Are we okay? Can I continue? Can I continue? Am I okay? Okay. So in November of the same year, 1971, before the Stockholm Conference of Pope Paul VI the poor and concern for the earth. Essentially, the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. After Paul VI, John Paul II wrote the encyclical threat of pollution to nature. And its moral character. In this regard, he centered the need for individuals and communities to have full respect for the nature of the human person who he called attention also the different categories of being without whether living or inanimate simply as one wishes. On the contrary, in an ordered system which we call the cosmos. If we treat them as inexhaustible and we use them with absolute dominion, we seriously endanger their availability in our time and for future generations. The third element of John Paul II is about pollution and the causes of pollution. These considerations form a clear moral message. The demands of morality are indispensable for the way we treat nature and the well-being of the human person. So in 1991, on the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, Pope John Paul II again wrote another encyclical called Centesimus Annus. With regard to the nature of private property, and the universal destination he referred to the widespread anthropocentric error, which says that our failure to recognize that our capacity to transform and in a sense to recreate the world must always be in a consonance with God's will. So to correct the faulty mistakes Pope John Paul II pointed out that all human beings as individuals and in community must respect the created world and be conscious of our duties and obligations towards future generations. Because the things that God has created are for our use, but we must also be responsible for those who come in the future. So, going beyond natural environment, Pope John Paul draws attention to the destruction of human environment. He introduced the concept of human ecology. Human environment is even more serious. The important green movement is concerned about the balance of nature. And worried about the extinction of animal species. But very little effort is made to safeguard the moral conditions of the human person. Humanity, who must use it, but the human being is also God's gift to us. For this reason, we must respect the natural and the moral structure which God has bestowed on creation. So, Pope John Paul II applies this thinking to modern urbanization. And it calls for a proper urban planning, a proper urban city planning, which is concerned with how people live, and how people work. So based on this expanded social thought on ecological question, establishing the relationship between the human person and the world or nature, it became important later on for Pope Francis to invite us to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So the proper ecological balance will not be found without directly addressing social problems and poverty. And this made the bishops of Canada to write the following: ecological harmony cannot exist in a world of unjust social structures. Nor can the extreme social inequalities of our world result in ecological sustainability. So let me sum up John Paul II, what he's saying. So we must respect both natural environment and human environment. And the two are connected. We cannot respect natural environment and abuse human environment. The more we respect our natural and moral structure, the more we respect other people and then nature. So, natural environment and human environment are closely related. And for natural environment to be respected, we also must respect human environment. Now, after John Paul II came Pope Benedict. In 2007, Pope Benedict XVI pointed to the ecology of nature, human ecology, and then social ecology, and said the three ecologies are connected. And so he goes on to teach that increased industrial production in recent years needs a lot of energy. Needs a lot of energy. But the energy must be clean and not polluting. So the Pope expressed serious concern for those who suffer, for those who are suffering in poor countries on account of energy resources. In the following year, Pope Benedict visited Australia. Drew attention, noticed the cause, including erosion, deforestation, and then devastating drought. At the same time, the world's mineral and ocean resources horizon. He said the development of peoples, their rights and their duties are connected to the environment. So the book of nature is only one and it includes between the human person and his world. And for this, we need morality and we need ethics. Now, Pope Francis was elected 3 years after Benedict, and he rooted his association and observed that integral human development and concern for the poor are connected. So, in 2015, when he wrote his encyclical letter, the United Nations was organizing COP21, about COP21 about climate change in Paris. And so with this, Pope Francis encouraged the meeting in Paris to recognize six points. The first point, all human beings are affected, and everything in nature is also affected by human beings. The crisis of the climate, the misuse of natural resources, and pollution have their effect on the poor of the earth. Second point, everything is interconnected. We cannot understand the social or natural world in isolation. They must be understood together. The third point, everyone must act responsibly to save our world. From individuals who recycle their products, who use energy sparingly, to enterprises who reduce ecological footprint, and world leaders who set ambitious targets to reduce carbon in the air. The fourth point, we must be truthful and we should not hide or distort facts in order to gain selfish advantage. We must engage in constructive dialogue genuine, trusting, and trustworthy, so that everybody can contribute to saving nature. And the last point, the sixth point, we must develop such spirituality and sensibility to nature as to be able to listen or to hear nature invite us to worship and adore God who created everything. So, my dear friends, sorry for boring you. I'd like to bring this complete to a close. The text will be available to you so you can read the details. So, I'll try to conclude. So when we speak of the environment, we really mean a relationship between nature and society. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves. We are part of nature. Our body was created from the earth, and it is sustained by the product of the earth. So we are part of nature. We are included in nature. So we should not make ourselves masters to abuse nature. Care for nature and not In conclusion, I would just wish to ask all of us to reflect on the fact that we have an intergenerational solidarity to also live. We receive the earth for the earth. So our wish is that this conference and all the interventions and the addresses and speeches will sharpen our awareness of the need to care for creation to support our present life and the lives of those who
Thank you, Your Eminence, for being with us and for delivering your paper.
Thanks to you.
I have noticed we had some technical issues. That's why we would be more than happy to disseminate your report so that everybody can get acquainted with it in detail. Thank you very much. And now I'm honored to invite Father and Dr. John Chrysavgis, who is advisor to the Ecumenical Patriarch on environmental issues. He is the person who, on the global level, has done more than anybody else for promotion of the spiritual ecology. And this is the sphere where we all learn from the Orthodox Church. They are our instructors. I also want to pay attention to the fact that in the chat you can find link to the message from World Patriarch. Tomorrow we will be reading it when we will have representatives of other churches. It's a very warm greeting, and I would like you to read it over. So, Reverend Dr. John Chrysavgis.
So first of all, allow me to thank the organizers for this Ecumenical Week. And this ecological webinar in particular. I'm very honored to join such distinguished colleagues on the panel. For me, the whole webinar could have stopped where the mayor mentioned chocolate from Ukraine, but I need to go on, I think. I should say, because of the terrible connection we had in listening to Cardinal Turkson, it reminded me of a story in the Desert Fathers where someone visited Abba Anthony and wouldn't say too much. There was silence during his visit. And when he was asked why he would visit Abba Anthony all the time, he replied that it is enough for me to see you, Abba. And I think in terms of the humility and the grace that Cardinal Turkson is known for, I want to thank him for all that he symbolizes, even without speaking, in this urgent struggle to protect God's creation. Let me open with a confession that an ecumenical event such as this is not coincidental and not accidental. I have come to believe that in our relationship with creation, we are called to evoke and affirm our interconnectedness with the rest of the world. It's what I would call the ecumenical imperative of creation care. Because this sense of interconnectedness reminds us that the earth unites us all before and beyond any doctrinal, any political, any racial, or any other differences. We may or may not share religious principles, ethnic backgrounds, or political convictions, but we most definitely share an experience with the earth, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the ground that we tread, albeit not always equitably or justly. So by some mysterious connection that we do not always understand and sometimes even choose to resist, the earth reminds us of our interconnectedness. So the power of ecumenism, the power of ecumenical dialogue lies in beginning to open up beyond ourselves, beyond our own, beyond our communities, beyond our churches. It's learning to speak the language of care and compassion. It's giving priority to solidarity and service. And in this respect, creation care has a vital ecumenical dimension, inasmuch as it brings us divided Christians and insulated believers before a common task that we must inevitably face together. As the Ecumenical Patriarch stated in his encyclical for September 1st this year, it is clear, he said, that the integrity of the natural environment is the shared responsibility of all inhabitants of the earth. You see, people often think of ecology as leaves and bees, as flora and fauna, as sun and soil, as parks and trees. But it's not just that. It's about much more than that. It's about the social nexus around these things. Let me tell you about what's happening in my country. When Donald Trump took office, he announced that the United States would leave the Paris Agreement. The Cardinal spoke of the Paris Agreement and its importance. On the one issue that demanded a worldwide collective response to safeguard the earth for future generations, the United States chose to walk away. That simply is not the way forward any longer. It's not good policy. It's certainly not good spirituality. And let me push this a little further. Cardinal Turkson spoke of the human ecology or social ecology or integral ecology. And Pope Francis, in his encyclical, emphasizes the cry of the poor. So I should point out here that I'm not referring to Donald Trump as a political leader or as a scapegoat. I'm referring to Trump as a symbol of all that was already morally wrong before he took office and will most likely remain morally wrong after he leaves office. Donald Trump is not an aberration in the system. He is a mirror image of a broken system. People think that if someone else is elected, everything will magically change, everything will somehow return to normal. But Trump is not unique. He's not exceptional. He is the inevitable culmination of a society that combines instant celebrity and cheap capitalism, consumerism, and corruption. He is the embodiment of all that is wrong when society promotes the rich and pulverizes the poor, when profit is the only standard. Second, let me underline the fact that the Christian approach to creation care emerges from our fundamental teaching that God created the world out of love, that God so loved the world that his word assumed flesh and dwelt among us, and that we are called to treat creation like our own flesh. For 30 years, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew has emphasized this, that the environment is not only a political or technological issue. It is certainly not a fashionable exercise in public relations. It's a fundamental and profound spiritual issue. The degradation of creation can only be reversed, can only be resolved by addressing the moral causes of the ecological crisis. That's precisely why religion has a key, a vital role to play. And I would say even more than this, it's a theological issue. That's why the Ecumenical Patriarch introduced the revolutionary notion of ecological sin that Pope Francis underlines in Laudato Si. Because we need to expand even our understanding of sin and reconciliation from what we have long considered as purely individual transgression, or at best some social wrongdoing, to a much broader, generational, and even ecological abuse of creation. As the Patriarch again noted in the encyclical for September 1st, the very life of the Church is an applied ecology. And by the same token, as he continued, destruction of creation is an offense against the Creator, entirely irreconcilable with the basic tenets of Christian theology. A third point. In order to appreciate this spiritual interconnectedness, this cosmic liturgy, as St. Maximus the Confessor called it in the 7th century, this vision of the world as larger than ourselves, larger than our narrow interests, we must adopt a spirit of humility and simplicity. Far too often we look for solutions in a hurried manner, without listening to creation. We either rush to alternatives or remain complacent in our lifestyles, and we forget that it is our choices, our lifestyles, that led us in the first place to the situation we face. The present ecological crisis is not just the result of bad judgment or boundless greed. It is also largely a result of oblivious success, of impressive development. We have to try and discern the connections between military war, for example, the insatiable lifestyle of the rich, the calamitous flight of refugees, and the ecological plight of our planet. And to achieve this, we first need to stop, to reflect. Paradoxically, the answer may lie not so much in action as in inaction. That's what I learned from the spirituality of fasting as not consuming mindlessly, of prayer, of not constantly being preoccupied with doing, and asceticism, of surrendering our selfish desires for the needs of others. This is the way of humility, of learning to tread lightly on this planet, of assuming responsibility for the consequences of our actions on others, especially the poor. If we are guilty of a relentless waste, it may be because we've lost this spirit of compassion and sharing. So what can we do? In order to alter our self-image, what is required is nothing less than a radical reversal of our perspectives and practices. Most importantly, we must all learn to do and live with less. Again, the Cardinal referred to this, because the balance of the world has been shattered, and the ecological crisis will not be solved with sentimental slogans, but by self-denial as a solution to self-centeredness, by learning to exercise self-restraint and a readiness to say no or enough. And here, I think, lies the heart of the problem, because we are unwilling. In fact, we violently resist any call to adopt simpler lives. We've misplaced this spirituality of simplicity and frugality. The challenge is, how do we live in such a way that promotes harmony and not division? How can we acknowledge every day that the earth is the Lord's? We have to learn to live more simply so that others can simply live. And that brings me to my fourth point, namely the parallels between the ecological crisis and the current pandemic that we're all experiencing. Because whether speaking of climate change or COVID-19, we're dealing with an unprecedented crisis. And crisis, the Greek word krisis, implies judgment. We will be judged by our response to these critical phenomena that are shaping and jeopardizing our lives. How we respond is exactly where the church comes in. Again, in his recent encyclical, the Ecumenical Patriarch noted the close connection between the two. He wrote, "The fact that during the period of the pandemic, with the mandatory restrictions of movement, the shutdown of factories, the diminishment in industrial activity and production, the fact that we observed a reduction of pollution and the encumbrance of the atmosphere has proved the anthropogenic nature of the contemporary ecological crisis. In some ways, the greatest threat to our planet at this time is actually not the novel coronavirus, for which a vaccine will at some point be discovered, but climate change. The growing but largely unrecognized death toll from rising global temperatures will eclipse the current number of deaths from all the infectious diseases combined if planet heating emissions are not constrained. Rising temperatures and intensifying storms will cause greatest devastation in poorer, hotter parts of the world, sure. In fact, even COVID-19 has carved a deep divide between the rich and the poor. But the economic loss from the climate crisis and the pandemic, as well as the cost of adaptation and restoration, will be felt all around the world, including wealthy countries. The World Economic Forum has called for a great reset, as they say, of capitalism in the wake of the pandemic, arguing that true sustainability will only be achieved through drastic lifestyle changes. And a team of international scientists in Australia recently concluded that in order to address climate change in light of COVID-19, I quote, "We cannot rely on technology and science alone. We have to change our affluent lifestyles and reduce overconsumption in combination with structural change," close quote. All of that means that we cannot play politics with climate change, the defining issue of our time. We cannot play politics with science or the health of our planet and its people. And when politicians dismiss leading infectious disease experts as alarmists, they're in fact using a pejorative straight from the playbook of those who deny the science behind climate change as a hoax. The strategies used to dismiss climate change and COVID-19 follow a similar pattern and are employed by many of the same people. It starts with denying that the problem exists. Then people try to obstruct action, claiming it's too hard or maybe too expensive to fix. And finally, they complain that their freedom is somehow under threat. My son recently told me that COVID-19 provided us with a fascinating and invaluable social experiment. Throughout the pandemic, scientists and at least some civil and religious authorities asked us to do the slightest, most trivial thing for the sake of others, for the sake of the world. Just wear a mask. And still the answer is no. Still the answer is politicized. Still the answer is my rights and my freedom. What are the chances that people will respond to having less and hoarding less or wasting less and sharing more for the environment? In closing, let me highlight a recent document on the social ethos of the Orthodox Church. It's entitled For the Life of the World. It was composed by a commission of Orthodox scholars appointed by His All Holiness, Patriarch Bartholomew, and blessed for publication by the Holy and Sacred Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It's already been translated to more than a dozen languages. The document addresses contemporary issues in a sustained manner that's frankly unusual in the Orthodox Church, issues like poverty and racism, human rights and reproductive technology, science and the environment. And the purpose of the document is to provide a reference on vital challenges in ways that are consistent with living as Orthodox Christians. It's a translation of basic Christian teachings into the language of compassion, into the language of justice. Because by understanding the social principles of the gospel and the church, we can actually shift the narrative from threat or mere survival to concern and love. And then the church can assume a prophetic role, articulating a moral response to climate change and COVID-19. My friends, economy and politics decide who will survive, who will have clean water and air, who will have health care. But economy and politics will often do so at the expense of the poor, at the expense of minorities. And in this sense, climate change and COVID-19 are wake-up calls. We often hear it stated that COVID-19 is somehow the great equalizer, the great stabilizer. But it isn't really. It's actually what has exposed structural inequality, exposed institutional corruption, exposed systemic racism. Pope says this in his latest encyclical, For All Brothers and Sisters, where he says that we've proved that we can't work together as we've faced this pandemic. The world will change through climate change, and the world will change as a result of the pandemic. The question is, what direction will it take? Will the global economy be more exclusive, more divisive, or will it become more inclusive, more equitable, more sustainable? These are the questions I think we must ask ourselves and one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for such a wonderful, emotionally colored and deeply personal report. And Thank you for uniting the question of integral ecology with COVID-19. Sometimes we say that ecological crisis is invisible while COVID-19 is visible. We can see it. Due to health issues, Professor Moltmann will not be able to join us, but he sent us his speech. I will read out some passages from it. Before that, I think we will have a brief discussion. So I'm inviting participants to ask questions to Cardinal Turkson and to Dr. John Chrysavgis. I have already accumulated a couple of questions, and these questions are with me, but if you wish to ask a question, you can raise your hand or simply write them in the chat. So, the first question I received with Penny Kavil, I will translate it into Ukrainian. How to carry eco-theological debates at the moment when the conservative evangelical Protestants do not perceive, who read eschatological ideas from the Bible in a very eschatological perspective and very suspiciously approach everything what the science says about climate changes. How shall we communicate with Christians like these? That's question number one. The second question, it's the question from seminarians of Lviv Seminary of Holy Spirit, the section that is dealing with environmental issues. Their question is, what tasks is Church putting in front of itself in terms of ecological development? How does Church imagine its parish work, environmental-wise? And question number three, which eco projects are such? Are there any eco projects where religious groups are involved? I think we will ask this question to next panelists who are based in Ukraine. So I think that with these two questions, we will leave our panelists. So how to communicate with conservative evangelicals, and what tasks does Church see before itself in terms of parish work in the sphere of environmental issues. So any one of you who would like to start answering, you're welcome.
Cardinals go first usually.
No.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. I mean it's good and important to recognize that you refer to evangelicals are still Christians. So evangelical Christians, you call them. And as Christians, the one document which makes us all followers of Christ is the Bible, is the Holy Scriptures. And the Holy Scriptures invite us. Jesus does not only ask for faith from people, he asks for more than faith from people. So it's not just who call me Lord, Lord, but those who also do the will of the Father who act. That's why Jesus formulates the great, judgment scene at the end of Matthew's Gospel with exactly concretely what we've done. So if I meet any evangelical who is conservative, I think I will make the Bible my point of departure and begin a dialogue or conversation, not because we agree on everything, but because we all agree that the Word of God is what is made us Christians. And then refer to James, the letter of St. James, that faith without works is dead. So that just means that our belief must play out in the way we relate with God, with creation, with ourselves. And that's why, for example, Pope Francis says being concerned about his social condition. So social condition is what? Social condition is the environment we live in, how we eat, what we drink, how we're able to feed our families. All of these belong to what we call the social conditions of individuals. And therefore, it's difficult to preceding or beginning from the scriptures to think that one can and still move away from anything that becomes, as it were, the living out of the faith or the message of scriptures. So briefly, if I met a conservative evangelical or Christian, we'll begin our conversation with a prayer. In the prayer, we'll probably pray the Lord's Prayer. Where we say, give us this day our daily bread. And where we pray that our sins are forgiven as we forgive others. And gradually recognize that our faith itself involves us in communion and communion with other people, our interrelated, interconnected lives and existence. But most importantly, to recognize that we cannot love God and not love what God has created. We cannot, in contemplation, praise and admire the beauty of God without recognizing and ensuring that the beauty of God's creation is also preserved. So some
Thank you very much. Father John, can you add?
Yes, I want to thank His Eminence for that approach, because that is the right approach. That is the Christian approach. That is the humble approach. I'm not sure I'm always in the position to do that. I do wonder sometimes whether we're even reading the same gospel as many of my brothers and sisters in the more southern states here in the United States of America. But I think the approach of His Eminence is correct in terms of it is wrong in some ways that evangelicals have appropriated this term evangelical, because that is the source of our own thinking and our own theology and our own discipleship, that we are followers of the gospel message of Christ. And based on that sort of line that His Eminence raised, I would also add that I think there's a misunderstanding or misappropriation of another term among many conservatives, and that is the whole notion of eschatology that was raised in the question. Eschatology being a very technical, highfalutin Christian term for the kingdom of heaven, the final events, the last days, the kingdom. But the kingdom of heaven, just as the whole notion of eschatology that theologians misunderstood for centuries. Eschatology was always, up until, a few decades ago, it was the last chapter of a long and boring manual of Christian doctrine. And by the time you got to that last chapter, it didn't really matter anyway, because it was about something after this world. But that's not eschatology. That's not the kingdom. It's not what happens after everything else has finished. In which case, of course, why would anything on this earth matter? That's the fundamental sort of conservative approach, that what really matters is what comes after all of this, after this world, after we die. But as Christians, we believe that the last times actually define our moment in time. The last times shape the way we live in this world. I like to refer to them not as the last times, but as the times that give lastingness to everything in our world, where everything matters, where everything is created by God out of love, where everything is unique, everything is important, sacred, valuable. Every person, every last detail in this world, every last speck of dust, as Olivia Clement used to say, on the planet. So that's what eschatology means. It doesn't do away with the importance of this world. It gives ultimate importance, sort of heavenly importance to this world. Don't we say, on earth as in heaven? Again, that's the Lord's Prayer that the Cardinal mentioned. So that's all I would really add.
Thank you very much. I will now pass the floor for a question to Reverend Ivan Datsko, who is the president of the Ecumenical Institute. Please, I will kindly ask you to be as brief as possible, because we are a little bit lagging behind.
I will speak in English, and because I will address His Eminence as also Archdeacon John. Well, both presentations were excellent and it gives us very much to think about. But frankly speaking, we didn't expect anything else but excellency from an eminence and from the advisor to the Ecumenical Patriarch. But my question is, why couldn't we start already? There are 102 participants from I don't know what countries. I can see Germany, I can see Belgium, I can see Italy, and so on. And of course, Ukraine and Poland. I mean, as an ecumenist, I must say, as of Vatican II, we started to discuss with the Orthodox what unites us and not what divides us. Therefore, we are not discussing filioque, primacy, universal jurisdiction, conciliarity, synodality. We are discussing something that is united not only the Catholics and Orthodox, but also the Protestants, Anglicans, and so forth. Now, couldn't, and since at least I know the leadership of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church really wants to enter a very concrete theological dialogue on this point, couldn't we create a working group, gruppo di lavoro, to work on these questions? Because there are certainly a lot of things which we haven't considered yet. There might be difficulties, challenges, and so forth. Couldn't we make it a resolution of ours, not just on paper, but really within a certain framework of time, that we will create a working group, Orthodox, Catholics, and everyone from other confessions who wish to join, to come to some conclusions, concrete conclusions, I mean, in Ukraine, in Europe, and in the entire world. That's all I have to tell you, Your Eminence and Archdeacon.
Shall we take another question from Mr. Konstantin Sigov? Mr. Sigov is a professor of Kiev Mohyla Academy based in Kiev, and he is also director of the publishing house Spirit and Letter, Duch I Litera in Ukrainian. Of course, if not to take into account his participation in the life of our Ecumenical Institute and his role in the huge number of translations of Orthodox and other books.
Your Eminence and Father John, many thanks from Kiev Mohyla University and our publishing house, Spirit and Letter. The Day of the Prayer for Creation was established by Patriarch Bartholomew and later supported by the Pope. You mentioned Olivier Clément. He underlined the importance of celebration of this day. How is the feast celebrated in the USA and in Rome? Concretely speaking, how you manage it around you and in your culture? Thank you very much.
Come back now. So I really enjoyed the question also by Father Darko. It is important that we work together on this issue, especially I think it's very not coincidental. I think it's providential that we have someone like Pope Francis who really does care about both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor in his life and in his statements. He's the real deal on these issues. And someone like Patriarch Bartholomew, who for decades now has underlined the primacy of this issue. It is important that we work together, and it's not just those two leaders. The Archbishop of Canterbury did the same with September 1st, the World Council of Churches, the Conference of European Churches, the World Lutheran Federation. People, I think, have been made aware of these issues on various levels and in separate ways. It is good to bring this dialogue together, and we can make more of a difference if we are united on this front. I say we can do better because I want to respond also to the earlier question by the students in the seminaries there in Lviv, who asked about what's happening, in parishes, and Konstantin's question about how we celebrate these issues. The truth is, not enough. Far too little is happening. Our highest of leaders are promoting these issues and advocating these issues, as critical, as fundamentally theological and spiritual. And for the most part, it depends on the local dioceses or even the local parishes as to how much actually happens on the ground level, on the grassroots level. In the United States, we have a particular organization that's affiliated with the Assembly of Orthodox Bishops. So it has standing as such among the Orthodox churches. And it's called the Orthodox Fellowship of the Transfiguration. And we do try to spread the word in the various parishes, but it's hard work. It's the difference between moving from, the mouth and the mind to the heart and to the flesh, to, not just faith, but also actions. And that's a hard thing for Christians to do sometimes. It's a very hard thing for Orthodox to do sometimes. We do like to take pride in our theology, but we don't often walk the walk.
Thank you very much. Before I pass the floor to Cardinal, I would like to read aloud a question from a professor, Laseliadis, if I correctly heard. The question is how in practice all Christian traditions can unite their efforts in critical situations, especially connected with environmental issues, and to become efficient on the universal level. I think that this question is inaccurate with the previous ones asked by Reverend Ivan Detsko and Professor Sigov. Commenting on what Dr. John Chrysavgis said, I would like to express my gratitude to seminarians who watch us in Lviv, Kyiv, and in other cities, because it's you on whom future of parish work will depend. It's you who will be teaching your parishioners ecological theology. And now I pass the floor to Cardinal Peter Turkson. The floor is yours.
Okay, so the first question was about the celebration of the 1st of September. It is true, and we're grateful to the Patriarch for having the Orthodox tradition had the 1st of September celebration for a long time, and it was very providential that after writing Laudato Si, Pope Francis came to a recognition that as two lungs, as it were, breathing together, we cannot, separate the two. So invited the Catholic Church to come on board, celebrating 1st of September as the day of prayer for creation. The very first celebration was marked by Vespers in St. Peter's Basilica. So an evening of prayer presided over by the Pope, with our office formulating and coming up with a small message. So this has been the tenor. The message goes out to all the world, and we try to have it a little bit earlier so parishes can be invited to plan their own celebration of the 1st of September according to the content of the message. This year, the celebration of the 1st of September, the day of creation, became special because a movement, a Christian ecumenical movement called the Climate Alliance, Catholic Climate Alliance, came up and they suggested or offered to celebrate this together with us. So seeing that, so we defined a month of celebration from the 1st of September to the 4th of October, the Feast of St. Francis. And this took the form of the celebration of the seasons of creation. So it's a celebration that began with a message a mention and invitation to prayer by Pope Francis, and different events in different parts of Christian communities around the world. Culminating in the Feast of St. Francis on the 4th of October. But as we know, this year, the Feast of St. Francis on the 4th of October became still more special, with the Pope decided to sign a new encyclical on human fraternity, Fratelli Tutti. So the basic message is that we should be caretakers of the earth as much as we take care of. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence. I would like to ask Father John to make last final comments.
Yes, just very briefly, going back to the seminarians and their concern, and the questions about what more can be done. In terms of seminarians, I would like you to begin pushing hard for courses to be taught in your schools, in your departments, in your seminaries. And by courses, I don't just mean adding a course on the theology of the environment or the Pope's encyclical or the Patriarch's work and so forth. I mean bringing in environmental issues and all that goes with that, the integral ecology, if you like, bringing that into the very core of your seminarian studies, of your theological studies. It should be a part of your scripture classes, of your how do you teach Old Testament and not talk about creation? How do you teach New Testament and not talk about the sacredness of the flesh and of all creation? How do you teach liturgy without doing that? How do you teach dogma without doing that? How do you teach ethics without doing that? It should be part and parcel of every course. It should be for priests in parishes, not just one sermon on the 1st of September or the 1st of October. It should be a part of every sermon. How can you possibly not include all that God created out of love in everything that you say and promote? That's all I just wanted to add.
Thank you very much, Father John. The Ukrainian Catholic University, that also teaches theology, is currently reviewing its curricula in order to see how ecological and environmental awareness can be more present and vivid in the curricula. Because, as you say, it's something that we have not paid enough attention before, but now we are changing and we are reviewing our curricula, and I think that your presence and the presence of Cardinal Turkson and the message from Patriarch Bartholomew will be a call to us and a sign how and where to move further for Catholics, for Protestants, and for Orthodox churches in Ukraine. Thank you very much. So we are moving on. As I said before, Professor Moltmann will not be able to join us today. Early in spring, he agreed to come over to us to Lviv. For us, it was almost a surprise because when we were inviting him, we did not really expect this. It's a 90 plus years old person, and still he expressed his desire to come. But due to the issues with COVID-19, we kindly asked him not to risk and not to come. And now he's complaining that he has a shortage of breath, has struggles with breathing, and that's why he asked me to deliver his speech. We were thinking whether to read it out or not, and then eventually we decided that the voice of Professor Moltmann should be heard. It's a representative of Protestant denomination. I will read out only the beginning of his text. I will be doing it in English. That's why all those who are following us in Ukrainian, I would kindly ask to enter the section interpretation and change your language. I think you are supposed to select Russian in order to hear Ukrainian version of this text. Thus, the text that Professor Moltmann sent to us
ecological future of modern theology. Professor Moltmann writes, "Today we stand at the end of the modern age, at what has to be the beginning of the ecological future of our world, if our world is to survive. A new paradigm is in the process of developing, a paradigm which links human culture and nature differently from the way they were linked in the paradigm of modern times. The modern age was determined by the human seizure of power over nature and its forces. These conquests and usurpations of nature have now come against their limits. All the signs suggest that the climate of the earth is changing drastically as a result of human influence. The ice caps of the poles are melting, the water level is rising, islands are disappearing, droughts are on the increase, the deserts are spreading, and so forth. We know all that, but we are not acting accordingly to what we know. Most people are closing their eyes or they are paralyzed. And yet, nothing hastens on the catastrophes as much as a paralyzed inactivity. In our culture, we need a new understanding of nature and a new picture of the human being. And that means a new experience of God. Here, a new ecological theology can help us. Why theology of all things? Because it was modern theology which determined the relationship to nature and the concept of the human being in the modern age. The determining concept was the lordship over the world, which has to be exercised by the godlike human being. It was the interpretation of God without the world and the world without God. It was the mechanistic concept of the earth and of all non-human dwellers on the earth, which had to be subdued and subjected. There is an old joke. Two planets meet in space. The one asks, "How are you?" The other one replies, "Oh, I'm not at all well. I'm ill. I have Homo sapiens." the other answers, I'm sorry to hear that. That's really bad. I have had it too, but never mind, it will pass. That is the new planetary perspective on humanity. Will this human planetary sickness pass because the human race goes away with itself, or will it pass because the human race becomes wise and heals the wounds which it still continues to inflict on the planet Earth down to the present day? And now a message to the interpreter. I'm skipping to the page 20, top of the page 20 of Moltmann's text. I'm reading the conclusion of Professor Moltmann's text. Apostle Paul had the groaning of those who are moved by the Spirit of God as they wait for the redemption of their bodies. He therefore also had the groaning of the non-human creation, but by which he was surrounded. He was convinced that it is God's Spirit itself which leads us and the whole creation side for redemption from the fate of death. The Spirit who is now present in the beginning of the new creation, in which death will be no more, for it is the Spirit of Jesus' resurrection and the comprehensive presence of the risen one. Orthodox theology has expressed this in its hope not only for the deification of humanity, but for the deification of the cosmos too. The whole nature is destined for the glory which humanity will partake in the kingdom of the completion. Human beings are part of nature in their own character, in their destiny, in their hope for life. So they do not stand at the center of the world. If they are to survive, they must integrate themselves into nature and into the community of their fellow beings. They are not entitled to the arrogance of power over nature and the liberty to do what they like. Their attitude should rather be characterized by a cosmic humility and by an attentive respect in all their interventions in nature. It is only when we become aware of our dependence on the life of the earth and on the existence of other living things that we shall turn from being what Luther called proud and unhappy gods into truly human being. True knowledge is not power. True knowledge is wisdom. And I'm ending this beautiful piece by Professor Moltmann. So I'm bringing this part of the session to a closure, and I invite now our next speaker, who is Ukrainian and who is Dr. Volodymyr Sheremeta, the head of the Ecology Office of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. If you Volodymyr, Dr. Sheremeta was really a paramount in helping us to find the best way of articulation of our Ecumenical Social Week, and he does a really incredible job in his work with the priests, with the seminarians, up to publishing the kids' stories for children. So we will have Dr. Sheremeta, and then will follow Dr. Svetlana Romanko, and at the end, Dr. Zinovy Sverda, all three Ukrainian experts. But I will introduce them later on. So I'm grateful to Father John Chrysavis and to His Eminence Cardinal Peter Turkson for being with us. We really appreciate this. So, Dr. Sheremeta, please.
Glory to Jesus Christ. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to the organizers of the Ecumenical Social Week, personally, and also on behalf of the Bureau on Environmental Issues at the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. for selecting this topic, To Hear the Cry of the Earth, Integral Ecology in Act. The topic of my presentation is the holistic ecology by Pope Francis, a key to the preservation of our shared home. Humanity is today facing global social and economical challenges. Exhaustion of natural resources, pollution of environment, lack of access to drinking water, deforestation, lack of or loss of biological diversity, climate changes, degradation of ecological system. All these all are just some of the symptoms of contemporary ecological crisis. Anthropogenic impact onto the environment doesn't have any analogies in history, is unprecedented, and just like a boomerang is coming back, threatening human life, health, and having negative impact on the social welfare of the participants and the future generations. In this context, we face a necessity to seek answers to the question, how can humankind save our shared home, the planet Earth, and how can we achieve integral development for the sake of a harmonious and justful society? An important contribution on the way to answering this question is encyclic by Pope Francis, Laudato Si, about the care on our shared home, and it contains integral ecology as a key to overcoming contemporary ecological crisis. The key to understanding the integral ecology of Pope Francis consists in stating the fact that everything is interconnected, according to the principle of retinency. It formulates ethical demand to be aware of ontological interconnection and interrelation of different sections of human activity on the personal, social, economical, and ecological spheres. The methodology of integral ecology by Pope Francis insists in the triad see, assess, analyze, act. In the 6 chapters of this document, he presents the doctrine of the Church pertaining to the existing ecological problems, their causes, and also the key presuppositions and instruments for overcoming these problems. What is happening to our shared home? How to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor? In the first chapter of the encyclic Laudato Si, Pope presents the key symptoms of the current ecological state. It's a brief list of key symptoms such as air, earth, and water pollution, exhaustion of natural resources, climate changes, and destruction of biological diversity of fauna and flora. Pope Francis states about tight relation between ecological problems, medical, social, and economical problems. He says that pollution of environment causes a wide range of diseases and millions of premature deaths. Exhaustion of natural resources leads to the violation of social justice and also fosters wars, and wars consequently can cause very harsh consequences for the environment and cultural heritage of the nations. Analyzing the relevant environmental issues, Pope Francis is focusing above all on the internal reasons. He says the earth, our home, is more and more like a huge waste dump site where everybody got used to throwing away everything. But this dump site is also impacting in a negative way the most underdeveloped groups of society. Ecological call to till and preserve and keep. In the second chapter of Genesis, in the so-called Gospel of Creation, Pope unveils such notions as the dignity of human being or human dignity, and values and value of a human being as God's creation. Every piece of creation has its value and mirrors the limitless God's wisdom and kindness. In accordance with the dignity of God's image, Imago Dei, a human being is called to till and keep the created world. Pope Francis, quoting Saint John Paul II, teaches us that for Christians the question of responsibility for the created world is part of practicing faith. In fact, Pope Francis is putting foundations of sustainable biblical and theological basics for the integral ecology, keeping in mind the simple statement mentioned in the book of Genesis that human life is based on three fundamental and tightly interconnected connections. With God, with the neighbor, and with the earth itself. When one of these connections is torn, it is defined by Pope as a sin, and this sin is also causing the distortion of our mandate to take care of the earth, and causes us to perverse harmonious relations between humanity and nature, and they become conflicts. Human being as a root of ecological crisis. The third chapter of this encyclic is entitled Human Being as a Root of Ecological Crisis. It's dedicated to a search of the roots for ecological crisis. Among those roots, Francis mentions scientific and technological process that does not acknowledge any limits or ethical responsibility, globalization of technocratical paradigm, modern anthropocentrism and relativism, and also completely chaotic desire to consume more than required. Pope is also cautioning us cautioning us against the danger of perceiving nature exceptionally as a matter that can be endlessly used, and to perceive ourselves as an absolute master of reality, which such perception always leads to the destruction of our existential basis and causes the rebellion of the nature. Ecology is not possible without the respective anthropology. This is what states Pope Francis, calling to a better understanding of our true nature, our true dignity, and the gifts that we received from God. Integral ecology. In the fourth chapter of this encyclic, which is entitled Integral Ecology, the pontific stresses the significance of the integral ecology as a pretext for solving key critical ecological problems. Ecological problematics cannot be sorted out in fragments or by avoiding the consequences of destructing natural environment. It is significant to identify multiple interconnections between the human being, its social environment, and its natural environment, and to try to solve eco problems in a holistic way, integrally. Dialogue and cooperation. In the fifth chapter of this encyclic, which is entitled Principles for Orientation and Actions, the author gives key points and recommendations for creating and implementing integral ecology and responsibility for the world in which we live. Pope Francis underlines the significance of understanding that our planet is our motherland, and the humankind, the humanity, is the people who lives in this one unique home. Everybody, as part of this home, should make his or her contribution into the preservation of this home, in accordance with the responsive style of life. Pope is warning us against populistic and short-sighted politics, that is short-sighted policy that is oriented on conquesting the electoral votes and on avoiding any unpopular measures that require the limitation of consumption. A healthy dialogue between politics and economics is crucial here for the integral human development. I hope that our next speaker will visualize this aspect. Also, NGOs make their significant contribution. Due to NGOs, the society can control the consumption and make it and optimize it. One of the key pre-assumptions of integral ecology and the improvement of environmental situation is to be united in the fight with corruption. On the way to ecological conversion, many things have to be changed, but first of all, we ourselves, human beings, have to be changed. We are facing a cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge that requires a lot of work. It's in the 6th chapter of this encyclic. The external deserts in the world spread because the internal deserts have already become limitless. This is what Pope Francis says, quoting Pope Benedict XVI. Accordingly, to overcome contemporary ecological crisis, we need a deep and integral conversion to God. The testimony of such conversion is awareness of the world as a gift of love from the Heavenly Father, which causes the feeling of gratitude and humility, and also creates in us the attitude to Christ, it creates in us a new attitude to Christ, to a natural gifts, and our wise and responsible use of resources in daily life. So we have to know how to respect other people, how to respect life, how to use things properly, how to keep order and chastity, how to respect local ecosystem and take care of creation. It is important to foster new attitudes and new responsibility from grassroots, from early education, and important role here can be played by schools, politicians, NGOs, and mass media. Pope Francis puts his accent on the change of models of the quality of life, on the understanding of the development and economical growth and consumption. The success depends on critical amount of people who change their own style of life, who will be pressing and equalizing political, economical, and social power. From technical office, they are telling me that you should not be making any pauses. You should speak continuously without any pauses. According to Pope Francis, Church should carry ecological education above all in the process of catechization. And the ecological mission of the Church consists in a new ecological evangelization, that is in service to community and for in the context of contemporary social and ecological challenges. The huge role is of the spiritual seminaries and educational institutions and also monasteries. They can play a huge role in the fostering of ecological consciousness, on thoughtfulness in the use of resources, and on grateful speculation of the creation, on taking care over the needs of the poor and the protection of the environment. The important aspect of the ecological education is fostering awareness of sacramental dimension of creation and the sacramentality of the human life. The key conclusion in the encyclic by Pope Francis is stating the fact that everything is interconnected and we are all responsible for the created world, and everybody is called to become instrument or a tool in God's hands for the sake of saving his creation. Ecological question cannot be solved fragmentary without holistic approach. It's important to identify the different interconnections between human being, its social environment, and the natural environment, and eco problems should be solved integrally. Pope Francis states that ecological crisis, as any other social crisis, is rooted in the crisis of personality, in the crisis of values, worldview, and attitude to God. And this is where we should look for, we should seek some efficient solutions. In order to preserve our shared home and our global and to promote our global ecological conversion of all the participants of the social process, we need to start from the conversion of a heart, from understanding our own world, our own place and responsibility in God's house. every human being that was called to existence by God leaves his or her unique social and ecological trace, and everything has meaning. Change in the way of thinking, in the style of living, in the models of behavior, consumption, communication, work, and rest. Even the slightest action with care about environment does make change. Every saved kilowatt of energy can become a huge expression of love to God, to the neighbor, and it can be that little donation from the widow that we know about from the gospel for the creation and for the preservation of our shared home. It is important that ecological contribution can be done by is done by all the participants of the social process according to the principles of solidarity and subsidiarity. Family, school, mass media, and others. Pope Francis is aware that very often in the ecclesiastic environment, even the most active and the godly Christians do not take ecological problems seriously. And that's why the author characterizes this attitude as a lack of consistency in faith and lack of responsibility in the Christian life, and also as a deficit of testimony of a real relationship between the human being and Christ, because this faith is not supported by the adequate attitude to the world and to the environment. That's why Pope Francis is reminding us that practical implementation of the Christian calling should be authentical and should be implemented in the integral ecological conversion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Sheremeta, for your presentation and for everything that you are doing on the level of Ukraine for the promotion of ecological consciousness. And now I'm honored to invite our next speaker, Dr. Svetlana Romanko, who is managing director at the international organization 350.org for Ukraine in the Eastern Europe countries of Caucasus and Central Asia. Svetlana, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us. Dear participants, dear community, thank you very much. I wanted to pay your attention to the following topic: the end of the fossil fuels era and the green course in public and practical debates of Ukraine and the world. Well, I would a little bit narrow the world to the European Union because the world is a too huge notion. But if we talk about EU and Ukraine and about how can we avoid a climate catastrophe, that would be already something for today. I would like to start from saying that in the public discourse, we've been speaking too little about the fossil fuel. This fossil fuel has been with us for only 200 years, but it has led us to the survival mode already and the climate catastrophe. Why? Because the 90% of emissions of the green house emissions are caused by the burning of fossil fuel. I mean, oil, coal, and gas. Without these mined materials, without which we cannot even imagine contemporary world, but all the facts, all the catastrophic figures are telling us that this is the era that is coming to an end. We have to refuse from using fossil fuels. I will speak a little bit about this, what happens in the private and public discourses and the NGO discourse. We cannot ignore this fact. If we don't pay attention to this fact, in the last year, we have noticed quite a lot of attention to the use of green course. This green course was borrowed from the European Union because European Commission has developed a very impressive strategic green course. They talk about they talk about economics, they talk about city development, urban development, zero pollution, and constructing EU as a global leader in this case. Yesterday there was EU summit and there were some results even for Ukraine regarding green course. The results are that Ukraine is entering association with the EU, and that's why Ukraine is strengthening is strengthening the performance of demands of EU demands in order to overcome crisis consequences and in order to provide for the promotion of EU standards. But this will not happen if we, especially those people who represent our interests, I mean parliamentarians, I mean the government, I mean ministries and other institutions, if we all do not implement these regulations and if we do not take responsibility. Fossil fuels make a lot of damage, and this damage maybe seems to us invisible, but this damage ceases to become invisible when damage is caused to particular people, to their health and to their life. Fossil fuel is the root of the problem that is causing the change of climate, and the change of climate is its consequence. Today in our reports, I heard about anthropocentric posture of human being. This era, this epoch, is the one that we lived at, and the anthropogenic changes are caused by the activity of the human being. And many experts think that it is our activity, our irrational consumption. Our individual consumption may be lesser, but what we call capitalistic consumption plays a key role here. This unthoughtful use of natural resources, part of which is the use of fossil fuel, cause such catastrophe. That's the pollution of the air, probably visible consequence number one. We can see it. There are lots of respiratory diseases. Some people's lives, the general lifespan is getting shortened. We also notice that there is acidification of the waters in seas and oceans, and this impacts the cycle of life of the marine organisms. Also, we witness drilling or boring fuel holes, installing pipes, and different processing facilities in oil and gas industry. They deeply intrude and destroy the environment of the objects of fauna and flora and unique natural landscapes. This also causes lessening of and access to profitable landlots, including the agricultural landlots and recreational landlots. And I would like also to speak about the problem that was already announced today, is the problem of social iniquity, of social injustice, that for many people who do not own corporations, and we are the majority, we make the majority, the billions, the inhabitants of the developing countries or the countries that are underdeveloped, they simply do not emit anything into the air, and all the emissions are done by the highly developed countries, but the unprotected layers of society are impacted by this. What are the consequences? This means that some people are simply deprived of elementary bare necessities and access to natural resources, such resources without which we can barely imagine human being. That's lack of access to the drinking water. Ukraine is also in the zone with deficit of drinking water. Sanitarian circumstances. That's also the loss of income or housing facilities. It's a possibility. It's unemployment. It's a lack of food and the decay of traditional agricultural farming, where when different plants simply do not grow, do not produce any harvest, we witness the increase of droughts due to climate changes. Some of the bad consequences is also the rise of the natural disasters, which are strong and frequent. Climate policy and environmental policy usually lose to economics. Economics is dictating the decisions. It's a fact that in Ukraine, people use 3 times more energy than the equivalent number of people in the EU countries. So with such economics, we cannot do much for the sake of environmental improving of our environmental situation. When people get united, that means that they are inspired by solving certain problems. All the world is already discussing new coming issues. It's climate apartheid. It's not an official term, but I came across this term in some international publications. Ecological apartheid. It's when only people who are well-to-do, who have a lot of money and can afford good air, access to good and clean water, they will be doing okay, while the rest of the people will be either dying or having serious health issues. So what can we do? I, as a representative of the civil society, also as a representative of the scientific community, I can say that we have to impact the following spheres: political decisions and electoral processes. We have always we need to get interested at all times what future candidates think about ecological issues. I have looked through the agenda of all political parties, and there is nothing, not a single statement about their attitude to environmental issues. So we have to work with political parties and with their coalitions. There is a party that is called Ecological Transition. They are promoting moving to renewable resources, energy resources. So it's about us. It's all about us. Shall we be able to organize, to gather together, to organize petitions, protests, and to attract attention of those who are at power? Because our future depends on this, because the access to resources is getting less and less, and the rigidness with which they are being used will surely give us very bad consequences, including ecological consequences. What else can be done to end the era of the fossil fuel use? To terminate subsidizing this industry. According to the International Monetary Fund, the coal, gas and oil industries have been receiving $5 trillion per year and $10 million per minute. Direct subsidies for the consumption of fossil fuels are twice as big as the subsidies for the renewable sources of energy. So this cannot be like this because millions of people get polluted by emissions and our climate is getting worse. Next is we have to reduce the demand for fossil fuel energy. Since Ukrainian coal thermal power plants produce half of all the electricity for the internal market, they are the most pollution producing in the world, and energy they produce is accordingly the most expensive. So since 2015 the construction of such coal thermal power plants in the world in general has dropped by 84% because it ceased to be economically profitable. But in Ukraine, oil, coal, and gas continue to be perceived by the government as the chief prospective energy resources. So we have to think how to change the situation right now. Also, I would like to dwell on the climate risks because business representatives who are key stakeholders on the green transformation and to the termination of fossil fuel use are opposing to such changes. And I think only climate risks can convince them. They should be part of our strategy. It should be also introduced into their business plans because ecological risks are a complexity of different hydro and meteorological risks. According the world markets still do not have obligatory and comparative data on the level of risks that are caused by the climate crisis. According to the Global Risks Report issued by 2020, this year the price for these risks will grow, and economical confrontation and extremal weather circumstances and the destruction of natural resources and ecosystems, all this is in that report. Green course in the cities is also a roadmap for local reforms to promote the overcoming of the climate crisis. I want to share with you one figure. It's a real victory of all the NGOs in Ukraine who have been with us for the last 3.5 years. Opposing to climate change. According to our research a couple of years ago, 3.5 years ago, only 23% of Ukrainians knew that there is climate change in Ukraine, and very seldom they would initiate some actions or demand something from their politicians. Now, according to the last research, we conducted it in Kiev, but it was also a national scale research. So the figures changed from 23% to 67%. So this is the rise of ecological awareness. What can change these climate changes and what can preserve the global temperature? It's the green course in the cities. We, and not only we, are offering the civil society representatives and even politicians also. We think that we need a roadmap of reforms, how to overcome ecological injustice and social inequity. Also, we have to include the plan for sustainable and energy development and climate, local program of energetical transition and adaptation to the climate change. Also, many cities should switch into the use of renewable sources of energy. We have already produced a scenario for for switching into the renewable resources. Zhytomyr was the pilot city where we tried this. I think Lviv is the next city. They also signed a memorandum with us, and we will see some changes in the behavior with waste, with garbage. And maybe one day we will reach 100% use of renewable resources, energy resources. Thank you very much for your attention. I could speak about this more, but I think I have to end. Dear Svetlana, thank you very much for your presentation. We have you have moved us to the deeper level of practical side of the problem. So we could hear how the problems that we could hear about are now being solved. And now I have I'm honored to invite to the floor our next speaker, Dr. Zinovy Svereda, Vice President of the Ukrainian Cooperative Alliance, a professor. Thank you very much for risking to come over here to Lviv. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much for participating and in and joining this Ecumenic Social Week, because this is not just a set of presentations. This is a message as a reply to different challenges, and also an occasion, an opportunity to offer some solutions and to change people's worldview. Economics and so my economy and ecology together towards a permanent development. This is the title of my presentation. Please switch on my presentation. It's next slide. Aristotle used to say, if you want to manipulate people, please do everything for them to forget the meaning of the words. If people forget the meaning of the words, they can be easily manipulated and they do not understand their mission. Economic, from Greek word, means household. It's or farm. So economics and ecology are very close to each other. They have their mission. If we analyze history of the humankind, we can see that people attributed nature with sacredness. Ecology was part of the religion, and it played its significant role. What's the situation today? Today, things are the opposite. Economics turned into religion, together with media, together with the newspapers. We only hear about economics and nothing but economics. And it feels like Dow Jones index falls, that would be the end of the world. Although this is not true. That's why when we speak about chaos, it's all distorted, because when people are concentrated on the divinity of nature, they would stop in their development, and very often their inventions, very often they would think up certain stuff because they lacked science. Today, we seem to have the same with economics, because we do not have any lack of educated people. We have lots of universities, but the logics of processes have been lost. Why does the human being destroy the house he or she lives in? What's for this progress? What's for this development? Where is it leading to? Maybe it's time to reassess and to review, to understand the nature of chaos and destruction. It happens when every institution is closed in itself, and where every science teaches only in itself. This distorts human worldview. We don't need theology. Theologians do not, it's only for theologians. We don't need philosophy. We don't need sciences in such and such institutions. So instead of teaching someone how to think, we just stuff the exams with tests, And so the problem begins from the very beginning when a human being as a child does not understand his or her calling. People who understand their calling, they live accordingly, and people who do not understand, they simply exist. So this moment of reassessment, this accent, whether shall we stress on quality or on quantity? And we can see where the point of interaction between economics and ecology comes. When we see the index of corruption, and if we see that in the corruption schemes, the biggest banks were involved. Everybody is screaming about corruption in Ukraine. But when the biggest world banks were washing off trillions of dollars, sorry, we can put the same coefficient in the ecological dimension. In order to create 1 millimeter of humus, this highly productive soil, we need we need a couple of centuries, and to destroy it easily, very quickly. So the corrupt systems are directly involved into the system of ecological destruction, because human beings do not have impact on these processes. Economical systems are based on the principle of quick money and lack of common sense. So any economical reforms without, so to say, human theological dimension are good for nothing. Maybe we should go aside from the question of accumulation and quantity. Let's start from the initial idea of development in Christian perspective. What's the use of progress? It's perfection, because if people do not realize their creativity and their calling, they do not act, they disappear, they simply exist, because true creativity never destroys nature. On the contrary, it always treats nature in accordance with the 10 commandments of Christian basic doctrine. Because what does Bible say? You are dust, and to dust you will return. And this is very true for carbon dioxide, because everything that we take from Earth should go back to Earth. Only then can we speak about the formation of sustainability. That means balance and harmony. And this phenomenon, this sustainable development, social sustainable development, should be treated as the top priority social welfare. In Davos, they talked about this. Let's take a simple example. When you have a plastic cup, it's much cheaper to produce it, it's much cheaper to buy it, but it's very expensive in terms of utilization. Let's take a cup of card, made of card or wood. It's a little bit more expensive to produce or to buy, but it's much cheaper, much cheaper in utilization. So let's assess products according to their cycle of life, not according to their production and economical profit. So what is green tariff? Green tariff used to be a fine or penalty for using non-ecological electricity sources. On the other hand, green tariff is reinvestment into less harmful energy resources. Those who produce low-quality food should be taxed with, so to say, a harmful consumption tariff. Because if we want to create ecumenical, the second ecumenical dimension of sustainable development, we have to create a new formula of cooperation between sciences and spheres of knowledge. And we need to understand that every student who graduates from a university should have a holistic, integral understanding of the world, not just focused narrowly on one science or some humanitarian discipline. So wisdom, sapientia is something that counts. So sustainable development is not just about preserving resources for the future generations, but to preserve life, to preserve human being from other human beings. So we have to stick to wisdom and not to greediness. So economics and ecology are very interconnected, and they are both connected with the healing of a human being, because the beginning of everything is the repentance, coming to understanding one's mistakes, and this is the beginning of the way to change and to transformation. Repentance puts us in the face of reality. Create something out of nothing so that nothing would become something. Thank you. Thank you very much. So it's just to show how serious are we about health. And about the health of Dr. Sreda. Dr. Sreda. I have no choice but do this. Thank you very much for your presentation. We have a little bit of time for questions and for discussion. I can see questions from Catherine Buchko. What and how takes away from human beings the capacity to be fascinated with the beauty of creation? How does this happen, and what can we do with this? And there was also a question from Ivan Datsko. But I think that Reverend Ivan Datsko can articulate his question in person. If you would like to join us in audio or even visual. Father Ivan, are you with us? Connected but not active. Yeah, we are hearing you. And then some other questions from participants. All the presenters are great. I'm so happy about it. But after having listened to everyone, I go back to my statement. Let's create the working group. Professor Moltmann's presentation. When I was a theology student 50 years ago, both in Rome and in Innsbruck, where I was studying, we were all obliged to read Moltmann's book, The Religion of Hope. And I think that from his statement that he has preserved this youth in his spirit. And I think that he articulates and has articulated thoughts of many Germans, not only Protestant Germans, but also Catholics. So I can appeal again to our German friends of different denominations to join this group. Secondly, Mr. Sheremeta, thank you very much for your word. I have something to say to Svetlana. You have pictured quite an optimistic landscape. We all have this feeling, but I'm afraid that this Ecumenic Social Week will end up in zero conclusions and zero resolutions. Maybe we will produce a resolution, but we have to create a wider ecumenical working group. Romanko, Dr. Svereda, all of his presentations are very good. What he said happened 2 days ago. We know how the President of the United States has been behaving in the last 4 years. And he also fell sick. But it looks like nothing bad happened to him. He was attended by numerous doctors. But what about the people who live in misery, all the people, the black and the white, different races? The United States lost moral authority for many people with electing Trump. What about stock markets? He said this, of course he wants to capitalize to win the elections. But he blocked any possible negotiations about the prevention of further spread of COVID-19 until the elections. So all the stock markets are falling. Of course, he's afraid to speak about this directly. So he did this after midnight. The Asian stock markets starting to collapse, and then the European markets. But then the stock markets went back to equilibrium. But how sensitive stock markets are to such kind of irresponsible leaders. Father Ivan is a representative of ecclesiastic community of church people who are interested in stock markets and in world politics, almost like Metropolitan Sheptytsky, who was also interested in all these issues. We had a question from Catherine Buchko. What deprives human being from the capacity to be amazed at, fascinated at the beauty of the world? Also, we have a question from Marichka Borovska. What steps should Ukrainian business take in order to become more ecologically integrated? Right? So I will start from Mr. Volodymyr Sheremeta, and then I will pass the floor to Svetlana. So, Mr. Volodymyr, I would like to express my gratitude to Father Ivan about for this wonderful suggestion, because this is inaccurate with integral ecology by Francis, because only together with common efforts we can save our house. In response, I would like also to offer, maybe we should not invent a bicycle when it exists already. For over 20 years, there has been existing a Christian ecological ecumenical association network. I have contacts with them, we've been in touch. Maybe we simply should intensify this cooperation, involving the Institute for Ecumenical Studies and anyone who would like to join. I would also like to briefly react to Katerina Buchko's question. I think the reason for it is spiritual dust. or sin, we can call it sin. Sin prevents us from seeing the values and the beauty of the world, and this makes us deaf to the cry of the earth. When people go away from God, they tend to think of themselves as God, and they consequently stop to notice things around. And in that light, they cease to be aware of their own value and their own divine dignity. And they fail to accept with gratitude all the God's gifts. That's the real, that's how it works. Svetlana, would you like? Yes, thank you. I would like to feedback this wonderful offer from Father Ivan and Mr. Sheremeta. Yeah, our power is in unity, but this power is also owned by the Church, a unique, unifying institution that can unite very different people. And this can bring about a real social change, that people will lead more ecologically aware lives. They will reduce emissions and will start treat processes in the state differently. That's why I am only with all my hands for this offer. I will support it. It's very relevant. Question from Katerina raised in me a whole bunch of thoughts, that people are losing ability to be happy by spectating nature when they are overwhelmed with problems and daily drudgery. It is proved scientifically, when there is a low level of life, there is no middle class, and many people are living on the edge of poverty. And in Ukraine, I want to remind, around 70% of people are, according to state official statistics, are below the level of poverty. They lack bare necessities. And this, of course, has impact on worldview. People are then concerned with daily problems, and they have damaged human dignity. Another problem is its absence of the rule of law. The rule of law is partially causing, of course, together with the weak economics and many other factors, it's no rule of law. You cannot refer to the court because you know that the court will issue an unjust decision. And so you cannot seek justice in the courts or some related institutions. This is also impacting the security. People lose their sense of security, and all these are basic needs. Only with security someone can spectate nature with fascination. Thank you. I will give probably very simple but nice example, because we are teaching entrepreneurship. We have trainings. And I had to send you an example. An old lady is coming from village, and she brings a goose and a hen, and then goes to the supermarket, buys gas, water, some dumplings, some, as we call, chemicals in Ukraine, and then goes back to the village and gives it to eat to her grandchildren. That's stupid. When do we cease to enjoy the beauty? When we have bias of the system of values, when the secondary becomes primary and primary becomes secondary. If we do not understand what is biological food, It used to be, this simple food used to be the food of common people. This food was giving you energy. But people create stupid problems. They do not think with creative, productive ways. They get very easily involved into dirty things. In Ukraine, we have problems, and I say, well, thanks God we have these problems. If these problems disappear, I will be unemployed. Because the main problem is that people do not understand what is freedom, what is the will of power of will, because to become one's own master is to use one's own head. Until you think your own head, and not with the help of TV, with the help of some external systems, until people start critically thinking, and we are not free because we are damaged with sin, and sin steals this freedom from us. Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. And that's why we've been talking about conversion, or changing the direction, changing our thinking, our acting. I think that the bell has rung already. We have to close our today's session of our conference. I want to express our gratitude to our speakers. I want to say thank you to our listeners, to our activists, to our seminarians. You are our future hope. I want to express gratitude to our partners, Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the city of Lviv. I also want to express our gratitude to technical service. This conference of such level with simultaneous translation is a real challenge. And you could see that at the very beginning we ran into issues, but this team solved these issues. So thank you very much for sorting this out and for making it possible for us to carry out with the conference. And also, I apologize before our participants for these inconveniences. Then our center, they were the most attentive listeners. Thank you. The team of the Institute of Ecumenic Studies, Irina Kitura and all the rest who had some sleepless nights, and some sleepless nights will have ahead. And I want also to express gratitude to our interpreter who did a great job. Was translating to us for half of the day. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for attention. And see you tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.